Hello, and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Southeastern Connecticut monthly program called Democracy is Not a Spectator Sport. The League believes that that is its mission, to keep democracy alive and well by informed voter participation. Tonight we're delighted to have two panels of legislators to talk with us from the Southeastern Connecticut area. The first panel consists of John Scott, Doug Dubitsky, Mike France, and Diana Urban. I'll introduce them specifically with their backgrounds, and then we're going to ask each of them a different question. Following that particular question that the League is interested in, we're going to ask them to tell us what they're interested in, where their passion is, or what their activity level is at the Capitol, what they're working on. And then we're going to stop briefly, and we're going to change panels and have three other legislators do the same thing with the leadership of Susan Dombrowski. And then we're going to take people away from the table, and we're going to let the legislators interact or ask the legislators to interact with constituents. And we'll be filming some of that as well. So welcome. And we're very pleased that you were able to come in this cold, miserable weather, and that we weren't snowed out, and everybody was able to get off the highway. So that's great. I'm introduce them from the my far right, John Scott. And John lives in Groton, Connecticut. He is a new legislator, just elected this last fall. And John is a Republican, and he represents House District 40. His committees include banks, energy and technology, insurance, and real estate. Welcome, John. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The second person is Doug Dubitsky, and Doug is from the town of North Windham. Doug's district, Chaplain. We have the wrong thing on here. Chaplain, that's right. You told me it was a very small town.
That's right.
And he represents House District 47. He's a Republican, and his committees are Environment, Judiciary, Planning, and Development.
Right.
Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The third person on our panel tonight is Mike France. And Mike's from my area. He's from Ledyard area. And represent, if I can find that piece of paper. Remind me of the district, please, Mike.
The 42nd district.
I should know that. The 42nd district. And Mike is a Republican. He is also new at the legislature. And he is on the, I'm not doing well in my notes here.
Appropriations, Planning, Development, and General Admin Elections.
At the busy one. At the GAE, the busy one. Thank you for filling in, Mike. Diana Urban represents District 43. She's a Democrat, and she's not a newbie. She's been in the legislature for how many years, Diana? More than
I would like to think about. This is my 8th term.
Oh my goodness, that's great. Her committees are Children, Appropriations, and Environment, and she lives in North Stonington. So we're happy to have you all, and we're going to begin with the question that is of supreme interest to the League of Women Voters, and that is campaign finance. And I'm going to ask Mike France to speak to this, particularly because he is on the GAE, and there's a lot happening on GAE right now. There were executives in a company told to donate to the recent Malloy campaign, and they did. Can Connecticut legislature act to prevent this obvious conflict of interest? And in addition, in your view, what should be done to rein in the influence of dark money in political campaigns? Mike?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the challenge with the premise of the first question is it's difficult to the legislature to regulate individual activity, even though it was alleged that executives were told to donate, they still chose to donate. It was still money that they donated. I think that the Citizens Election Program was designed to take the large donor money out of the process. Unfortunately, there's still some things that happen around that. I did propose two pieces of legislation related to that. First was not really related to that, but it was to reduce the cost. If you don't run unopposed, there's really no reason to provide a grant. Currently, under the current law, if you ran unopposed, you would still be eligible for the grant money. The second was more visibility. There are candidates who, upon receiving their grant, would then issue a single check to a consultant. And then that consultant would spend the funds, and there's no obligation under the current law for that consultant to explain where that money was spent. And so the only time that you would really know is if that particular candidate was audited. And then you would know exactly where all the money was spent. So the second piece of legislation I proposed was to force the consultants to then document how the money was spent on that candidate.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Our second respondent, we will ask John. In July, the Connecticut Supreme Court said that police must release only basic information about arrests while prosecutions are pending. This overturned a decision by the Freedom of Information Commission. Would you support legislation to expand what can be published such that judges can't so easily block release of information citing privacy concerns? And any other comments you want to make regarding FIO?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. I think it ties into your theme tonight of politics is not a spectator sport. I've been involved in local government for a lot of years. And open government has always been a concern about our activities. Here in Groton, whether it was the town council or the RTM, we were always cautioned about how we held our meetings, how we had conversations outside of the meetings, things like that. And I think it ties into what the police are up to. They have arrest powers, and they have powers that are pretty strong, and we need to be able to monitor what they're up to. So I would definitely support legislation that made their activities more open. I certainly understand there are certain privacy issues that need to be addressed, but we need to know what's going on. I mean, court cases can take years to litigate, and if we have to wait 10 years for a case to be settled before we can find out what happened, I don't think that's right. So I absolutely would support legislation that would open up the discussion and allow people to be able to get appropriate information from our police departments.
Thank you. That's going to be that continues to be a big issue throughout the country as we have noted. Thanks very much. Let me move to Diana Urban, and Representative Urban. There's a 5-year plan, Public Act 13-178, in effect to redesign the state system for treating children with mental illness. You're very much interested in children, I know, and are on the committee. For example, ill children can now be sent home from the local ER with no provisions for follow-up care. Will you support the funding reallocations and new funding required to implement the recommendations? And if you could set that in context of the governor's announced budget, that would be helpful.
Sure, I would just love to do that. First of all, thank you. This question is particularly germane to me because I am chair of the Children's Committee, and this was our bill. And we did it after Sandy Hook, and we know that there was a lot of controversy over that incident and where we were going to go with it. I mean, a terrible, terrible tragedy. And there was a significant feeling that we needed to really address mental health. So this particular plan, which is basically driven by our Department of Children and Families, is unique to Connecticut because we are monitoring it. The Children's Committee, with my co-chair, Senator Bartolomeo, and myself, meet periodically with the agencies that are tasked with putting together this mental health plan, and we are incredibly involved in the process, which oftentimes legislators say, okay, this is what I want to have happen, and then we go away and do something else, and we never check back to see whether what we were trying to do actually happened. So we have introduced more legislation this session on an implementation committee so that we bring together all the groups, which we did public hearings all over the state of Connecticut to get input on where there were gaps and problems, particularly the one like you pointed out here. We have many of those in mental health. So we brought together those groups that were involved in those public hearings all over the state and said, okay, now we want to be sure this gets implemented. So let's do the implementation plan. Tying that into the governor's budget just on one particular item is one of the areas where we've experienced enormous success is with school-based health centers. And our school-based health centers, the #1 use after we did a results-based accountability study of them is mental health. And that, we believe, in the studies that we've done, is because children do not feel stigmatized when that health center is within their school. And they know the people that are the caregivers, they know the people that are the nurse practitioners and the psychologists, and they don't feel that they can't access those services and not feel being stigmatized by some, some sort of teasing or whatever might go on. Unfortunately, in the governor's budget, there's been a fairly big cut to school-based health centers, which we will be addressing.
Thank you. Thank you. I know this has been a big issue in all of Connecticut because of Sandy Hook, and has really been a driving force. And what I am interested in hearing, you've been a longtime supporter and pusher of the idea of results-based accountability. And so I was happy when you said that was included in your committee.
Yes.
Thank you. Doug, your question is the big one. Voting process reform. We all know about what happened in Hartford and a number of other places. And it stirred the pot for people to think about how do we run elections in the state of Connecticut. Particularly, how do we select our registrars of voters, and is this the most efficient and wise system to use? Do you feel that the system needs to be reformed? And if so, with what priority? And also, should the Secretary of the State have the power to select and or remove registrars?
Well, thank you for that question. It's obviously a very critical question, especially after what happened in Hartford. One of the things that we need to protect against is the politicalization of choosing registrars. I do not believe that the system of choosing registrars was the problem in Hartford. What was the problem was the registrars that were there were poorly trained and were not held accountable for doing their jobs correctly. There is a proposal out there to have only a single appointed registrar for each town. And I think that would be a big problem because there would not be the checks and balances. There wouldn't be the accountability that there is now. What we would have is whatever party is in power in that town would then decide who the registrar of voters would be. And I think that would be a big problem. Right now we have equal representation in registrars in most towns, and because of that we have somebody always looking over the shoulder of the other registrar. And if we stop doing that, if we go to a single registrar, and if we give the Secretary of State, who is obviously from one party or the other, the power to remove or appoint registrars, it really makes the situation worse. I think we need to have registrars from the various parties, and we just need to work on making sure that they are trained properly, that they have clear procedures to follow, and that if they don't follow them, there needs to be a procedure with due process and a process to go through to have them removed. I don't think that having the Secretary of State be the one that can remove or appoint would be advantageous. I think it would make matters worse.
One of the issues that I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Secretary of the State is the person who's the point person for the electorate to complain to say, you haven't been doing your job. These people are messing up, and you're not enforcing the rules that are in place. Do you have a suggestion of how that enforcement can take place beyond this condition that you just posed with regard to the Secretary of State being a representative of one party?
With regard to complaints?
With regard to enforcement of the election laws as they exist.
Well, clearly it's the Secretary of State's job to enforce these laws.
There's no enforcement power there.
Well, there needs to be enforcement power in the Secretary of State's office. I think that is the appropriate place. That's where that she's charged with overseeing the elections. She should have enforcement powers. But when there's a problem in a given town with one side or the other, it's best to have two essentially competing registrars looking after what's going on, because very often that will either show that there really is a problem, solve the problem quickly, or show that there really wasn't a problem in the first place. And if it needs to get escalated up to the state level, then I do believe that the Secretary of State's office should have the power to make sure that the problem is solved in a quick and efficient way, to make sure that the voters who are very often starting to pile up outside of the door trying to vote can get in and get their vote cast in time. Somebody's got to have the power to get in there and make sure that everybody gets their vote cast. And if it gets past the town level, it has to go to the state. Somebody's got to have that authority. And since the Secretary of State is charged with overseeing the elections, it should be the Secretary of State's office that has that initial power.
I would like to ask the panel, is anyone aware that any bills have been put forward in this area? I haven't seen any, and I'm curious.
Well, I understand there is a bill. I have not seen it, but I've seen discussion of it to make the registrar have a single appointed registrar in each town, as opposed to the dual elected registrars. And I've actually spoken to a number of registrars about it, and they're not very happy about it. They think that it would politicize it. It would essentially be a new vehicle for whatever party is in power in that town to increase their electorate in that town.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful answer. I'd like to redirect now and ask you what you're working on. And perhaps this time, since I even forgot to introduce her, I'll turn to Representative Urban and ask her. I know she's passionate about many things. What's top on your list right now?
Well, you know, as chair of the Children's Committee, most of the issues that I'm directing myself towards have got to do with children. And I think last session we did some really good work on concussions. We're taking another look at concussions with our littlest, the littlest athletes to be sure that they're protected. Yet again, we're doing the mental health areas. We're doing a lot of bills with the Department of Children and Families with abuse and neglect of children, trying to get some really good data on what programs work and what programs don't work, expanding our children's report card, which is a results-based accountability, web-based report card on how Connecticut's children are doing. But I would never, hesitate to mention the issue that a lot of people identify with me, and that is animals.
I was going to say
animal cruelty and the link between child abuse and animal cruelty. And we have had an enormous success with having our Department of Children and Families work with our Department of Agriculture. And I know this doesn't sound like a huge advance, but they're actually using the same form to report incidences of child abuse or animal cruelty, and those incidences are then cross-checked from each department, and we are picking up incidences that we never knew about to the tune of 4 to 5 in a given month. So it's been a tremendous success, but it took a long time to get there.
Well, thank you for your passion on behalf of the children and the animals of this state. I'll turn now to John Scott. Representative Scott, what are you working on?
Well, when I ran for this position, my theme was jobs and the economy, and so a few of the things that I've been very passionate about involve that. We have a shellfish industry here in Groton that's being hamstrung by processes within the regulatory agencies that regulate these entities, and so working on trying to loosen up those rules so that an entity that right now only has 3 employees could perhaps grow and have as many as a dozen employees. I don't think it's realistic to think that we'll find somebody to replace the 4,000 jobs that Pfizer took away, but I think it is realistic that we can make some changes that'll open up a bunch of smaller businesses with a dozen or so employees. On that same line, I've got legislation in that will help livery companies. Again, it's a regulation thing. If you want to open up a limousine service here in the state of Connecticut, you have to go through an application process and a public hearing. And at that public hearing, the competing limousine companies can come in and say there isn't an economic need for this limousine service to come to town, and they basically deny the application. And I don't think that's a fair way. I think, if I own a business, if someone wants to open up a business just like mine next door to me, it's up to me to make sure I'm the best darn business owner that ever existed. And I think that's part of our free market economy. So hopefully we'll have that pass. I put in bills to help calm down the situation that we have here in Groton regarding our fire districts. I've got a bill in for real estate continuing education. I've got some insurance bills in. And then lastly, I've been working on doing some things with UConn Avery Point. They're trying to expand some of their research programs. So they've got some outdoor laboratories that they'd like to improve upon, including the freshwater pond that's right across the street from the main entrance to the campus.
Great. Thank you. It sounds like you've
I've been busy.
have been very busy, yes. Doug, since I almost missed you the last time, turn to Representative Dubinsky. What are your areas right now?
Well, a week or so ago, Gallup came out with a new report that says that Connecticut has the worst job growth of any state in the nation in 2014. And the worst, number 50 of 50. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is reverse that. At least bring us up to 49. Get us on the right trajectory. And I could go through the list of my bills, but I don't think that's what you're looking for. You're looking to see what I'm doing up there to help create jobs, to help make Connecticut a little bit better. Sitting on the committees that I do, environment, planning and development, and judiciary, one of the things that I do is, I bring out issues in the testimony during public hearings and get people to explain why a given bill is good or bad for this state. There's a lot of bills up there. Right now they're all in concept, generally, meaning that we don't know exactly what they're going to say. They're an act concerning some topic, an act concerning government, an act concerning jobs. They're all very broad. What I'm trying to do is find out which of these bills are actually going to do something to create jobs. Some of my bills that I've been putting forward, I think will create jobs and will help small businesses build themselves up. One of them is I have a bill that just had a public hearing regarding unemployment insurance for seasonal agricultural workers and employees. And what I believe is if that bill were to go through, it would allow small agricultural workers, employers, to hire more people. Because right now there are very few farms that actually hire because the cost is too high. So what I'm trying to do, both on my committee positions and with the bills that I'm putting forth, is to reduce the burden on small businesses and allow them to hire more people so we can reverse our worst in the country position in job creation.
Good luck with that. Let's get to at least 49. Thank you. And last but not least, Representative France from Ledyard. Tell us what you're up to, Representative, and what your passions are.
Well, thank you for that. My two focuses have essentially been to deal with representing the municipalities as well as the business focus. I think that the first thing that I did after getting elected was to go around and talk to the municipal leaders in each of my 3 towns. So I met with the town council and the mayor in Ledyard. I met with the board of selectmen in Preston and the mayor and the chair of the council in Montville to raise the issues, essentially the mandates that are costing towns money and issues that have been unresolved by the state. And so out of that came a list of about 15 bills that were issues that were important to the 3 towns that I represent, and they were actually indicative of many of the small towns across the state. The second part, dealing with businesses, is really coming to look at the business industries that are in their small towns. So it's really niche markets. We have 4 wineries in my district, and one of the things that dealing with is signage. A simple thing, you would think. But it is important, and it has been a challenge for them to be heard by the Department of Transportation, get the signage they need, and really is a business driver. So I've been working on issues such as those to help more the state as opposed to individuals in my district, but many of the issues that have come about in my district are indicative of the ones across the state.
That sounds very rational, because we have lots of small business in our state, and they all need that kind of attention. So thank you, and thank you all. We're going to take a quick break and seat the second group of legislators, and I appreciate all your time, all your efforts, and I hope you get some sleep. It's a tough time right now. Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm standing here this evening with State Senator Kathy Austin and concerned citizen Lisa Saunders. Ms. Saunders has a question for Senator Austin.
Senator Austin, I see that now you are a co-sponsor, is that right, of HB 5525 concerning cytomegalovirus?
Yes, I actually heard about this this last year, and we tried to get a bill passed last year for this, and this year I was happy to co-sponsor it along with Representative Ryan.
I'm so glad, because I tried to, obviously I wanted to get it passed because my daughter was born with cytomegalovirus, because I was never warned about how to prevent it or that you should be worried about it. And I was a licensed daycare provider, so I'm very concerned that licensed daycare providers learn about this virus, because according to studies, 44 to 100% of children under the age of 2.5 are shedding this virus in daycare centers.
So I'm really very pleased to be a co-sponsor, and last year when the bill came through, I had talked to Representative Ryan about it, and he explained what had happened with your daughter and how important it was to do the testing so that parents would know of the consequences of this and what they could do. And so it seems to me that this is one of those common sense pieces of legislation that while, and I'm so sorry about your daughter, that you had to deal with the awful fallout of that, but I commend you for being a citizen advocate for your daughter and for children in the future.
Well, thank you very much. Apparently about 50 children a year in Connecticut are born with this disease, and if their parents aren't warned about it. So that is obviously my big concern, is that the health department warn women about it so that they know what to do, which is not to kiss toddlers on the mouth or to share cookies and utensils with them. And a lot of people know not to change the cat box, but they don't know that if their toddler is in daycare or they work in daycare, they just need to be a little extra cautious.
I truly commend, I think the best pieces of legislation that we get are those that are developed by what is called a grassroots activist, which you clearly are, and you have been an excellent advocate for this, and I think that its time has come, and I believe that we'll be able to pass this legislation this year.
That would be wonderful, and if there's anything I can do and the other people that are concerned about this, let us know. The bill I know cost $40,000 last year to implement, but taking care of a child that with congenital CMV is estimated to be at least $200,000 a year. So clearly, it's a cost saving also.
I know, you hate to talk about something like this, having a cost savings to it, but this is exactly the kind of bill that makes so much sense. It might have an upfront cost, but it has a long-term savings for everybody. And again, you've done great work on this, and I'm so pleased to be working side by side with you on this issue.
Thank you very much.
My name is Susan Dombrowski, and I'm a resident of the town of Franklin. I'm here tonight as a representative from the League of Women Voters, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and ask you a few questions. I didn't get a chance to say hi to you before. Ms. McCarty, welcome.
You. Thank you very much.
But we're here this evening with three of our local legislators. We have in front of us, firstly, Representative Andre Baumgartner from District 41. He is a Republican, and he serves on the Education, Finance, Revenue, and Bonding, and Transportation Committees. Immediately next to Representative Baumgartner is Kathleen McCarty. She is a representative of House District 38, a Republican, on the Appropriations, Education, and Public Health Committees, and she's from Waterford. Next to her is Representative Ed Utila, District 37. He is a Democrat representing the Committees of Government, Administration, and Elections, and Transportation from Niantic. Welcome.
Thank you.
I've got a question for each of you, if you don't mind. The first and the most important on our mind this evening is for Representative Baumgartner. Regarding campaign finance, sir, recently, Northeast Utilities executives were told to donate to the recent Malloy campaign and did. Can the Connecticut legislature act to prevent this obvious conflict of interest? And, in your view, sir, what should be done to rein in the influence of dark money in political campaigns?
Well, it's great to be with you and the League of Women Voters right here in the district. I sit here alongside the chair of the General Government and
Government
Elections,
Administration and Elections.
That's right, and I think it's going to be a hot topic when the session really begins to heat up. I think what we have here in Connecticut with the Clean Elections program is probably one of the most transformative and quite frankly fantastic programs in I think the United States when thinking about ways to eliminate, as you mentioned, dark money and just create clean elections programs. And I think it's important that, if we do have that sort of system, that we mitigate the opportunities for, perhaps super PACs or large, organizations, whether it be unions or super PACs or any other outside expenditure group, making sure that they do not intrude on those elections because it does undermine the Clean Elections program and the intent of that law. My biggest frustration with sort of those loopholes is that quite obviously the Clean Elections program is funded by taxpayers. So if there's other organizations that are putting in a significant amount of money in the system, then what is the purpose of having those really the taxpayers subsidizing those campaigns? So I would hope the legislature takes steps to close some of those loopholes. I think at the very least we need to put, stronger caps for the just the total dollar amount an individual can contribute to campaign committees, but campaign or party organizations. There was a loophole in the law where, for example, if you donated $100 to a candidate that participated in the Clean Elections program, you were still permitted to contribute to a state party that could then, shift those funds to an organizational structure that could benefit you. And we saw that with, I think, both the gubernatorial candidates and a state senate candidate this year. So I think, the effort to have clean elections isn't a partisan. It really should be a bipartisan idea and effort. So, I look forward to being a part of those efforts to create clean campaign laws in our state.
And I think the League of Women Voters would be very agreeable with that, sir. Thank you. Representative Kathleen McCarty, welcome. Regarding ethics, ma'am, do you support or oppose requiring all towns to adopt a municipal ethics code? And if so, how should such codes be enforced?
Thank you for the question, but first, again, thank you for this opportunity to address everyone this evening and for hosting this session tonight. And thank you. I did see above that the question on mental health services. I thought that was going to be my question. That's my area that I'm looking forward to speaking to the state about. But on the ethics question, yes, we do have an Office of State Ethics, and naturally all of these state employees were just recently trained in the training on ethics. So we are held to high standards, and I naturally am very much in favor of the State Ethics Office. However, I do also think that some of these services may be able to be looked at and talked about at the municipal level. I can only speak to my town of Waterford. We do have an ethics commission, and it seems like those terms come around quite often, so we're always looking for qualified people to serve on the ethics commission. And we do have a nice volunteer group of people, experts in different fields that serve. And it's a bipartisan board, and it follows our town charter. So if in fact there is a violation of any sort within the municipal government, it would be held and looked at by the local ethics commission, which I think is a service. So I would need to know a little bit more about the details of that particular initiative before I could answer in any better capacity. But I do think overall I would say that it doesn't cost much to form an ethics commission. They have a small budget, so I think it may be able to help across the state to be sure that the towns, the roles and responsibilities of those leaders are being held to those standards.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that there should be separate rules for large cities rather than small towns?
Well, I think when you're held to a standard, an ethical standard, I think that should be uniform across the state. So I wouldn't necessarily differentiate if something's right or something's wrong, I think. But there could be particulars in a town. For instance, some towns may have different setups, so naturally some of the roles and responsibilities might be different. But overall, I'm very much in favor of taking a good look at it. Anyway, thank you.
And the league would be as well. Representative Jutila, good evening.
Good evening.
Regarding the public's right to know, sir, in July, the Connecticut Supreme Court said that police must release only basic information about arrests while prosecutions are pending. This overturned a decision by the Freedom of Information Commission. Would you support legislation to expand what can be published so that judges can't so easily block release of information, citing privacy concerns?
So first of all, I believe very strongly in the public's right to know, and I think we should always have the maximum amount of transparency that we possibly can have in government. After all, it is the people's government. The people fund it. The people elect us, and they have a right to know everything that goes on in government. Now, there can be a place for a few exceptions that provide protections, particularly in the case of public safety is probably the best example. But Connecticut is a pioneer in freedom of information. Connecticut adopted the first freedom of information law back in the 70s. It was brought to us by our much revered and former late Governor Ella Grasso. And so we of all people should be in favor of maximum transparency. On this specific case that you refer to, so under current law, it's actually Section 1-215, which is part of the Freedom of Information Act. The police are required to release the record of arrest in any case where a citizen is arrested. The statute defines record of arrest very specifically, and it's a pretty limited amount of information that the police are required to release. What they're required to release is the name, address, the date and time and place of the incident that gave rise to the arrest, and the actual offense, and they're required to release one document. And that document can either be the actual police report, the incident report, or a news release describing the incident. Now, what the court held, the Connecticut Supreme Court, was that that is all the police have to release. The Freedom of Information Commission had ruled that they have to release the police report unless it's subject to one of the general exceptions in the Freedom of Information law. So that's where the law stands right now. As courts often do when there's an issue that's more of a policy issue than a constitutional issue, they'll kind of invite the legislature to revisit it and address it. So the GAE committee that I chair has effectively accepted that invitation. And we have a bill before our committee right now that would modify or even in a way overturn the July Supreme Court decision and require that the police release the police report. Again, unless it's subject to one of the general exceptions. Now, you know, public safety is an important concern here. Am I running over time? I'm sorry.
I can see you're very passionate about the subject.
I am, and I'll just finish up by saying we have to balance between transparency and public safety sometimes, and that's what the committee is challenged to do right now. Thank you.
That's a big job ahead, sir.
Thanks.
Mr. Baumgartner, would you tell us, please, what are you most passionate about in your first term?
Well, I have the great honor and privilege to represent, I think, well, I don't want to say arguably, but I would argue the epicenter of southeastern Connecticut, both Groton and New London. New London, I think in many respects, is southeastern Connecticut city, and sort of with that comes issues of, you know, of great importance, such as education, closing the achievement gap, where the opportunity gap is you know, growing you know, year after year in New London in particular. So you know, I'll be on the education committee this year alongside with Representative McCarty, and you know, one of the most important things that really the delegation, but in particular the New London delegation, needs to do is get New London on the priority list in order for the city to receive reimbursements for their massive school construction project, which would make New London the only all-magnet school district in the entire state of Connecticut. And in addition to that, on the Groton side, and also technically the New London side as well, there have been efforts to reinvigorate the idea or notion of the Thames River Heritage Park. And a big part of that would be having water taxis go to historical sites along the Thames River, such as Fort Trumbull, Fort Griswold, the Thames Street, with the potential to go all the way to the sub-museum, and then obviously the National Coast Guard Museum, which should open in some say 2017, perhaps 2018. So there's a lot of potential for growth in our region, but as you know, our region has suffered pretty significantly, you know, since the 2008 recession. Southeastern Connecticut really still is in recession. So I think as a delegation, our priorities really have to be bringing jobs to southeastern Connecticut. Historically, we have always been a manufacturing and tourist industry area, and so keeping those two sectors alive and well, as well as diversifying our economy, I think could, you know, really provide an economic renaissance in southeastern Connecticut. But it requires a lot of hard work and, you know, up in Hartford, advocacy for our region, and so far I've really enjoyed it, and you know, working on both sides of the aisle with our delegation, and also part of the Black and Puerto Rican caucus, the only Republican since the 1970s to be a member of that caucus. So you know, the exchange about how we can fix our cities and that policy conversation is really important to me personally, and obviously being a member of the Republican Party in you know, Hartford, as a member of the House Republican Caucus, which grew by 10 seats this year. So I think it helps with just having a more honest discussion about policy in our state, how much we spend, what we tax, and these are certainly things we'll talk about when we're discussing the budget this year. But so far, it's been a very humbling experience, and
You've got a big year ahead of you,
absolutely.
sir.
No, thank you.
Good stuff. Ma'am, Ms. McCarty, what do you see as perhaps your biggest challenge this session?
The biggest challenge. Well, today we were introduced, we had a briefing on the governor's budget, and this is going to be a big topic for all of us. It's a budget that has an $18 billion budget with a 3% increase, and so many of us have so many different special interests that we're all passionate about. Andre just mentioned quite a few of them on the education. I'm particularly interested in delivery of mental health services. I know we've talked about in this region that we have many areas that we need to collaborate, cooperate, and find out just what services are needed and how we can do that in a cost-effective manner so we can deliver quality services. So that's going to be a challenge, to be looking at this budget, to finding ways that we can maintain the quality of life in Connecticut in a cost-efficient manner. And I was very pleased today, as we went through this briefing, to see really the nice collaboration that we're going to have with both, I think it's going to be a bipartisan effort in many areas of the budget that we can come together on and find the best solutions that will provide the best services for all of the people of Connecticut. If I may digress for a moment, just back to Andre, I am particularly interested as well in quality education in Connecticut for all children. I think we're going to look at some of the major drivers in the education budgets and try to talk about that and relieve some of the burden on the municipalities and try to maintain quality education at the same time. Again, back to the mental health services, I think in southeastern Connecticut we have some very pressing issues where we need to be sure that we're collaborating so that each area that delivers mental health services, that everyone's communicating so that we can come back to the state and let them look at what is needed in the local levels, and perhaps have some of the nonprofits have a greater role. And so that's going to be a challenge overall. It's still a little premature at this stage to see just how we accomplish that, but I think the good news is that both parties are interested in really working together so we have the best budget for all of our citizens.
You just said two of my favorite words when it comes to government, and
Yes.
Representative Jutila, I'm going to ask you about this. Cooperation and collaboration.
Right.
You're a longtime legislator, sir. Can you tell us about what goes on in Hartford and how do we get things done using cooperation and collaboration?
You might be surprised.
I would be.
I agree with my colleagues that we do work in a pretty bipartisan manner, particularly through the committee process. I tell people all the time, sometimes people confuse us with the U.S. Congress, and they're not sure about, they know we're all in government and politics, but not always quite sure where we fit, and they think we're in the Congress, and I tell, whoa, wait a minute, no, we're not like that. I mean, they have a lot of strife and conflict down there, and we have our debates in Hartford, but I think in general we work well together, we get along, and for the most part I think we like each other, and people may be surprised to hear that. Because, the things that people hear about mostly are the big controversial issues where we may have differences as parties, differences in philosophy. But for the most part, we all want the same kind of things. We want our constituents to be safe. We want good schools for our children. We want good colleges and universities for our older children. And we want jobs and a thriving economy. Sometimes we may have a little bit different in terms of ideas in how to achieve those goals, but that's where the debate comes in, and in the end, we take action. I mean, the contrast is stark between Hartford and Washington, whereas Washington, that the Congress passes very few bills. We will pass hundreds of bills this year, and and most of those, I believe, if history is true to form this year, most of those bills will be passed on a unanimous or a near unanimous basis, I believe.
Working together, we can get so much more done than batting heads, right?
Absolutely.
All right. And that closes this segment. Thank you all very much for your time, your honest responses. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
It's like saying, we're gonna drain the ocean and we're gonna change the order of the earth.